Thank you, Mr. Tang, for your very incisive and sobering analysis of the sector. And next, may I call upon Mrs. Cherry Jay, Permanent Secretary for Education, HKSAR Education Bureau, to come forward to give us a keynote speech. Her title is Challenges Ahead. And echoing what Professor Zhang has just said, the subtitle is actually Not Changing is Not an Option. Mrs. Chair, please.
Professor Peter Yuen, Chairman of FSTV, Professor Edward Chan, Chair of Board of Directors, School of Professional and Continuing Education, Hong Kong U, Honorable Mr. Yi Yuen, Legislator, Dr. Richard Armour, Secretary General of UGC, Professor William Lee, Executive Director of Hong Kong CAABQ, Mr. Tim Noi, Chairman of the Committee of Self-Financing Post-Secondary Education, and Professor Wong Yuk San of Open University. These are all our keynote speakers, so I must pay respect to them. It's always difficult to speak after Professor Edward Chan. So good. But on the other hand, I'm so glad that our universities have such a distinguished professor who not only teaches well, but also speaks very well. And my colleagues have dutifully produced for me a speech, which although I have edited, I can tell you a secret, I never enjoy being a keynote speaker. Because you speak to a prescribed text, and hence straitjacketing your ability to respond on the spot. And I know that my colleagues will post my speech on the EDB web after this conference. And I'm going to give you a little bonus. I don't have time to change my speech, but I'm going to change it on the spot. You will be the only persons that hear the changes. Because I think it would not be a respect to Professor Chan if I don't respond to some of the points made. And on the other hand, he has, as what a professor should do, done his research and given you some numbers. So I'm going to economize some parts of my speech which duplicate what he has said. So without further ado, I shall begin. So you will distinguish that which parts are the evidence and which part are the read out piece. Okay. First of all, it would be a remiss of me if I don't start my statement with a warm congratulations on the 20th anniversary of the FSTV. Happy birthday. The first 20 years is indeed important. Some of us happen to be able to find our better halves. But whether we are able to find our better halves, the first 20 years always means birth to adulthood. At a stage where reflecting upon the past and contemplating what may lie ahead is most appropriate. And the Federation has been a strategic partner of the government in promoting self-financing post-secondary education. And for instance, it has helped us in developing the common descriptors for associate degree and high diploma, the design of the award titles and the operational guidelines of the qualifications framework credit, the introduction of the EG diploma program, and the design and the specifications of competency standard. And I must say that EDB is most grateful for the contribution of the FSTE, without whose effort I don't think we would be able to reach where we are today. And to be honest, in the process, the FSTE is also a pressure group. It has never hesitated to apply pressure on us. But don't take me wrong, this is not a complaint. We receive numerous representations day in and day out, asking for supportive policy and funding, and what Professor Chan said, ODA. So we may kind of get used to it. But in fact, I mention this as a sign of gratitude. Why? You will say, why do you welcome complaints? Indeed, we welcome the FSTE's complaints and pressure. Why? Because even without the Federation, we'll still have to liaise with institutions. We'll be having a lot of individual voices. But the Federation, being a coordinating organization, it is its role to represent the sector in bargaining with the government. And so the Federation plays a very important moderating role and coordinating role, so that we have a collective voice reach the individual voices that we would in any case receive. So in a way, I think the Federation helps us consider what are in the collective interest of the sector and what are the individual voices that we cannot afford to ignore, and what are the individual voices that we can afford to not to accord a higher priority this time round. So where we are now, over the last 10 years, we have witnessed a phenomenal growth in the development of sector, both in terms of numbers and the diversity of the programs. I think in terms of number, I would try to economize what I've written, because Professor Chen has given you a PowerPoint which lists out the number. And suffice to say that in the past, there are only 3 degree award institutions in the self-financing sector. How many are there now? A quiz for you.
What is it?
No, just degree awarding.
Oh, degree awarding.
Degree awarding, 10. But from 3 to 10 is quite a respectable growth. And 10 years ago, 6% of our full-time locally accredited first degree places were offered by self-financing sector, representing 1,000 places. Today is 7,000 places. And I think it's thanks to the contribution of the self-financing sector. Today, as my secretary always said, today 38%, to be precise, is 38.4% of our relevant age cohort students have access to undergraduate studies, which is quite a respectable percentage when placed with our Asia Pacific partners. And the growth is no less impressive in the sub-degree level. And we have a 3-fold increase in the number of places offered, and hence the access to post-secondary education by our students has risen from 30% in 2004 to current 70%. And number is not the only thing the government has in mind. We always try to promote diversity. And I can cite diversity, examples of diversity from a lot of perspectives. First is fields of study, which I don't need to go into detail, but also duration, outcome, target groups, and modes of delivery. Well, in terms of programs, apart from the fields of study, there will be non-credit bearing courses to credit bearing professional courses. In terms of learning outcomes, it could be craft level to doctoral degree level. In terms of mode of delivery, distant learning, blended learning, face-to-face programs. And in terms of duration, a few hours to a few years. And there are also programs targeted at different types of learner. For example, full-time, part-time, school leavers, working adults, and with different levels of learning, of affordability and learning objectives. Well, the sector has developed so well because it is characterized by flexibility, diversity, and responsiveness. And the government has not lost sight of the importance of building a backbone. Now, what is the backbone? Is the qualifications framework and the credit transfer system, I will submit, and which helps to build a framework for lifelong education. But lifelong education is a never-ending endeavor. On an individual basis, it enables the individuals to stay competitive. And as the professor said, we also want to look for positive spillover. And I think value-addedness on the part of an individual will collectively becomes the economy's competitiveness. And Hong Kong's manpower needs always top our priority. So we have introduced a study subsidy scheme for designated professions and sectors for 1,000 places on a pilot basis. And I won't go into detail because this is in this year's policy address, which I think you all know very well. And perhaps I just go into the future, what we are facing. I have no crystal ball, but one thing is certain. The next 10 years is going to be very different from the last 10 years. Quantitatively, the growth period is similarly over. As the professor said, student population is going to decline. And his figures is slightly different from ours. His figure is 42,200 in 22, and we are 500 more. I can assure you that in 2020, 23, it start to pick up again. But we're a little bit different is that the professor said that there's only 2,000 places for the self-financing sector. I can tell you it's not that case. Even if I just round it up to 42,000, based on this year and last year Hong Kong PSE, around 40% of the students make it to 3322. That means the threshold for admission to degree places. Assuming that this percentage stays stagnant, 42,000 would mean that 40% of 42,000 would mean around 15,960. And as you know, the UGC sector offers 15,000 first year, first degree places. So you have 960 quote unquote left over of the 3322 people. And if I use the total population of that cohort for 42,000 minus 15,000, it would leave around 27,000. Okay. Although the professor said that he does not favor top-ups, I have a different view. You don't top up by just giving them a general education, although generic ability are still important. But you give them a more vocationally oriented top-up. That is why we place so much emphasis on qualifications framework. My colleague Brian and Pevin, together with BTC colleagues and my boss secretary, have recently visited Germany and Switzerland. Although I know that education is always contextualized, we cannot just transplant one system to another. I think that there are some useful things that we can learn. Actually, I'm here saying what I have said differently to my boss. When he told me about that, I would say, don't transplant the system because they have a very high taxation. and then for their training, private sector, the private sector paying for the bulk of the course, around 80%, government only paying 10%. But here it's different. But I think what we can learn from them is the industry and institution linkage, which I think is still rather weak. This morning we had an internal discussion in which Brian Lowe, my deputy, who will be joining the panel discussion, and Richard Armour took part in it. There were grumbles around the table about the quality of our graduates. The grumbles are actually grumbles relate to my colleagues from the private sector. And I think actually our academics tend to teach to the best of abilities and to the best of the knowledge, but we all have blind spots. I have my blind spots, Brian has his blind spots, and Pevin has her blind spots. And I would say that academics also have their blind spots. And I recall that over 10 years ago, the Bar Association and the Law Society have overhauled the law faculties of the two universities, at that time offering law degree. Can we, in order to boost our competitive advantage, reach out to the private sector, ask them what you want, come out and look at our curriculum. If we don't produce what you want, give us internship, help us redesign our curriculum. I think if you can make your program relevant, if you can make the generic skills relevant, I think that will boost your competitive advantage. And I will also borrow, of course I'm no economist as the professor, but I love reading books on economics when I have spare time, which is very few and far between the US post. But I did recall reading a book by Michael Porter some 10 years ago called Comparative Advantage, not competitive advantage, comparative advantage. He was talking about clustering in the economy. Can you build clusters? More than 2/3 of the sub-degree, not the high diploma, but the associate degree, are actually in humanities and business administration and related fields. Do we need more of the same kind? If you're duplicating each other, can you go for some division of labor? I think these are thoughts which you can think about. So I think we need top-up. Why? Because I think top up is somehow for parents and for students wearing that, say, formal, that mooncake box-like thing on the hat means a lot to them. It gives them aspiration. This is actually the main reason why VTC gave a few years ago, why they had to start degree places. And I can tell you at that time, although as a member of the VTC Council at that time, I harbor my reservation but still supported, okay? But looking back, indeed, the ability, although still only a small percentage of VTC students got the degree ultimately, but that possibility would help boost the self-perception of the students and will help change the mindset of the parents and the students. So I think you need to give them hope. So I say I would admonish you to say I would admonish you to never say no to topping up. I'm sorry because Brian knows that I'm not feeling very well today. I've taken 2 painkillers before coming here. So I'm sorry if there are some grammatical glitches. The decline in the first few years in the student population is not that drastic, but after 2018, we are right in the storm. Now it's only a low depression. Okay, so make good use of these few years to get prepared. Is my strong advice. And we believe that with careful planning and orderly consolidation, you can mitigate significantly the negative impact of the student downturn. And just now, the professor said that I will keep an eye on you. I can tell you that my eyesight is not very good. I can see things in a very romantic light, and they're also beautiful, but I don't. And so I think to facilitate the sector to devise a consolidation game plan, my bureau has kickstarted a dialogue with the institutions and the federation. We would be joining hands with you to brave the storm. But one of our principles is that we never seek to micromanage. So don't expect that we can give you a prescription, because we are too conscious of the fact that we in the government have limited experience and we do have our own blind spots. So we will say yes to exploration of all sort of facilitation measures, but don't expect us to be your savior in every sense of the word. You have to think of the approach that befits your organization. And I would say that we will give you, first and foremost, the demographic trend, because that will be the evidence based on which you need to plan ahead. And I think you need to critically examine the competitive advantage as well as the comparative advantages of your program. Because I think you can build a few areas of strength in your institution. And as I always say, if you have more than 5 priorities, you don't have any priorities. So get focused, build on your strength. And because sustainability hinges not only on getting students, but more importantly, on the credibility of the learning process and the learning outcomes. And credibility, in my view, rests upon the tripod of quality, vocational relevance, and sound governance. Over the last 20 years, government has put in place various support measures all aimed to ensure directly and indirectly that this tripod of strength is sturdy. We have done so because we do treasure the partnership with the self-financing sector. For instance, we have allocated $3 billion to support research projects, and we have right from the beginning give out free land. Actually, it's almost free, it's nominal premium, land and premises, and we have also give out interest-free startup loans. And we have also introduced a $3.2 billion self-financing post-secondary education fund, of which Tim is the chairman of the committee. And we also introduced $3 billion to support research. Although the professor said that research is not that important, but we hear differently from the sector. And since we know that what the reality is perhaps less important than a person's perception of the reality. So we are willing to facilitate. And one important example of ODA and PDA, official development assistance and private development assistance combined, is in fact the matching grant scheme. As you all know, prior to 2013 academic year, the matching grant scheme was confined only to the UGC sector. Starting from that year, we have extended it to the self-financing sector, with 2.5 billion earmarked for the self-financing sector. Some of you have actually done pretty well in raising the funds. And in fact, I can tell you that giving you the money and asking you to be thick-skinned in soliciting donation is actually the superficial reasons. The more important reasons are twofold. First, diversify your funding source. And secondly, induce you to make connections with the private sector in order to ensure the program benefits. And I would say that the last point is actually the most important strategic point that we have in mind. And over the years, we are very happy to note that the sector as a whole has been responding to community demands rather well, and you have enhanced your quality as well as the student support. For instance, you have set out guidelines for locally accredited self-financing programs at the undergraduate level, and you have also embraced a lot of transparency measures, I think without which we cannot weather the storm relating to your application fee, your intake, etc. And I think we are indeed relying a lot on the sector and federation to respond to community demands and concern, so we retain the credibility of the sector. And in order to facilitate your closer dialogue with the business sector, we have kickstarted last October a seminar on closer alignment between post-secondary education institutions and industry. We hope to sustain the momentum by taking a series of follow-up actions. And these actions will include, for instance, stock taking of the current situation of the manpower needs of various sectors, focus group meetings with post-secondary graduates, sharing of good practices, and we shall also conduct industry-specific surveys and employers' views on the performance of post-secondary graduates. And here I would like to chip in a response to the professor's point about quality assurance. When EDB does our survey, you will appreciate that we do it in aggregate term. But what your individual institutions need is actually data specific to your institutions. And here I would like to sort of borrow one concept which I have started from the school sector to here. Over the last year or so, one of the reforms that I have made as the permanent secretary is to reform the formerly ACTEC. That Honorable Yip would know, we used to have an advisory committee on teachers training. And now we have reformed it to call COTAC. You don't need to care too much about the name. But one of which is that instead of one committee overseeing teachers' preparation from novice teacher, under student teachers, all the way up to principals, we now break it down into focus point. We have student teachers, novice teacher, and the middle management and school leadership will comprise principal, vice principals, as well as school managers, giving them focused attention. And in addition, we have always urged the COTAC, and now it has responded positively, and now putting its thinking hats on how to conduct it. Is I always urge them, never rely on just exit surveys. If you ask your graduates, are you happy with the course that you have just attended? I can tell you, talk show hosts will get the highest grading. So I will always urge the schools to conduct your survey perhaps half a year after they have graduated, asking them to look back. Have the studies prepare them well for the challenges they are facing in the workplace. If they were put in the position of decision making, if they were the director, the professor, what would they have done differently? Which aspects of their sub-degree experience that they would like to change, reinforced, or do away with altogether? Ask their view, not whether, and be open-minded to the changes, and also ask the employers. I think in that case, you will be able to show the industry that you really care about the learning outcomes of the student. And it's through the user that you can obtain user feedback. User feedback which is not affected by suntan effect. And in addition, just now I mentioned about governance. Governance to me is very important. Governance, in my view, makes or fails an organization. Because for any institution, governance is, to borrow an analogy with a computer, is a central processing unit which filters all deliberations. And the Committee on Self-Financing Post-Secondary Education, serving as a useful platform for discussing macro issues, announced in August this year the outcome of a consultancy study on good practices on governance and quality assurance with reference to local, regional, and international experience. Of course, you can guess that study is funded by EDB, but we asked the committee to do it because we know that we civil servants are good at identifying the problems, but we may not be that good in prescribing solutions. So we asked the committee to conduct a study which will cover both local, regional, and international practice in order to give you a whole plethora of references to draw from. And I think we will be scheduling such a sharing session, is it later this month? Yeah, later this month. And I hope that you take that experience back to your institution and consider what changes you may embrace to make you more responsive, to enable you to better perform your vision and your mission, and also to do things differently from your fellow competitors or collaborators. And last but not least, I like to also to mention that in the past, we have been saying that we want the sector to develop with strength. We will still be honoring that commitment. But the government alone cannot do it all. Apart from support in kind and in money, we provide the sector with timely updates on projections, and we also encourage you to strengthen your partnership with employers and various business and professional organizations, and strengthen your governance. And also, it's one thing that I would like to say in perhaps very blunt term. Be less reliant. Be less reliant. People nowadays say that Hong Kong young people have become rather complacent, etc. I have visited a university, a UGC institution whose name I shall conceal. That institution, I mean the council chair, is very dedicated. He or she, I will give you the gender also. That council chair had kickstarted a program, a reading program, because that council chair felt that the students focus too much just on study. They need to broaden their horizon. And storybooks were prescribed, storybooks which need to have sex, violence, crime, and also perhaps some foreign context. And I joined the discussion group to discuss that storybook. And I would say out of around 20 discussants, only 3 were local students. Most were non-local students, and guess what? Most were also from the mainland. And they were given the liberty to either discuss in Cantonese, English, or Mandarin, up to their choice. And most of the mainland students, even though their English was really sort of faulty, they struggle. Okay? And then I asked the organizer, the librarian who was responsible for the logistics, I said, was it typical of local students to be quite lukewarm to such activities? He said, yes. And he made one remark which made a deep impression on me. Our local students were not hungry enough. Okay. Sometimes survival is the best engine for change. I mean, look at Hong Kong. We became an entrepreneur because we had to survive. We became an industrial base because we had to do so. We had to shift our production base to the mainland because we had to do so. So I would say that government is here to help, but we only would structure a support network which leverage on your strength. And we have to be fair. We cannot have measure targeted at individual organizations. We can only do something for the sector as a whole. But doing something good for the sector as a whole guarantees the survival of no specific organization. And here you are representing also the sector, but also your individual organization. And so, in closing, I would answer one of the questions which the professor said about why do you have publicly funded sub-degree places and also the unfair advantage enjoyed by the ETC? I'll give you the official answer, which is also the true answer. The official answer is yes, we realize that inequity, but we are also a government that respects historical legacy. So in order to strike a balance between the two, we have to do it gently. Because you recall that the Polytechnic University and the City University started off as a polytechnic, offering sub-degree places. And when they were upgraded and when the rules have been changed, when self-financing sector was introduced, we cannot say that it's like characters on the whiteboard, let's wipe it off. Because involved with jobs and families. So what we have done is, in the last higher education review, we have kickstarted a program. And now, only sub-degree places in UGC-funded institutions which meet 3 criteria can enjoy public subsidy. That 3 criteria will be endangered species. That is, actually few people like to study, but that is important for human knowledge. And secondly is disciplines which requires a lot of investment, those laboratory-based. And I think third is those which the government is actually the one paying for the checks, like teachers' education, okay? Or I think mainly teachers' education, because not even medical profession, So I think these are the 3 criteria. And in fact, we have a program of gradually dwindling it down. So if you compare the number of UGC subsidized sub-degree places in the last 2 triennium with the triennium to come, you will see that it is a declining trend. As to VTC, I think people will recall that 10 years ago, let's turn the clock back 15 years ago, VTC was virtually the only organization dealing with vocational training, taking care of students who left school after Form 3 or Form 5. And I think it still had a role to play in that. As I always remark to my colleagues in VTC, I think gone will be the days when VTC enjoy a specific advantage in terms of government subsidy with respect to post-secondary education. We are very aware of the level playing field concern. But I would moderate with what I said I have actually made a commitment to the VTC chair and the executive director. If there are school leavers who finished their compulsory education at Form 3, did not want to study mainstream education, but wanted to go to your basic craft course. Don't turn them away. Even though EDB is very short of money, I will try to scratch every dollar that I have to subsidize them. Because the Form 3 school leavers simply have nowhere to go unless you can open your arms to them. Form 3 school leavers, and they are not an easy batch to handle. So for Form 3 school leavers, we will still give a preferential treatment to the VTC because they are the only player hitherto willing to take care of them. But for those who finish Hong Kong DSE, we know your sentiment. So it is in respect of areas where we want VTC to do something strategic, which have a positive spillover for the economy as a whole, and which other players in the self-financing sector have not yet been able to do it. Then we will turn to the VTC. Otherwise, we have heard what you say, and in fact, Professor is not the first one to mention that. So here, I would say that we try to strike a sensitive balance between historical legacy and level playing field. In respecting historical legacy, we are also respecting the rule of law, because all of these were decided in past, right? And I would have to end what I have said with a deep gratitude with what the Federation and the sector have done. And because my colleagues have researched and give me a quote from Albert Einstein, which I think is very good. So I will share with you. Albert Einstein once said, "The world as we have created is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking." So friends and colleagues, not changing is not an option. And neither I nor my colleagues know what the future lies ahead. But let's, hand in hand, embrace that brave new world and make ourselves stronger after the storm. Thank you.